Well, welcome everybody. Hey, we have a pretty good turnout today. I'm impressed with it. We're going to go through this pretty fast today because obviously a lot of things that we'd ordinarily do, we really can't do very well. I would like to ask if anybody has had anything published or sold anything or any since we've last met. Mary Jane, you have your hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Mary, no, you don't have your hand up. Okay. Did anybody have anything you want to say about what you've done?
I think Wendy was trying to say something.
Okay, yes. Mary, you have something you say. I saw your hand.
Mary Streeter, me?
Yes.
Yes, I have published a children's picture book, and I was invited to a school a few months ago before the, sheltering in took place. And so I was able to read the story to several classes and pass out cards. And so apparently that generated some sales, and I got a royalty check from my publisher. So that was nice.
Wow. Congratulations.
That's great.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. Wendy, you have your hand up. Wendy?
No, that was practice. I'm sorry.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yes, up here at the top, Karen.
Karen has a real hand up.
Yeah.
Okay. Karen.
I entered a limerick contest through the newspaper, and one of my friends and I started writing limericks, and we couldn't get stopped once we got started. And I'm finding more ways to bless other people with your writing. I've mentioned that before, but I have a friend who had a birthday this week, and I wrote her an entire limerick poem to say happy birthday to her.
Aw,
Nice.
my birthday's tomorrow.
I'll work on it.
Okay. I cannot see anybody's. I don't have a picture of everybody, so you really have to let me know if you want to speak. I have, in other words, I can see if you raise your hand electronically, but not everybody is on my screen.
Okay.
Anybody else? Speak up, or forever hold your peace. No. Okay. Well, let's move on then. Sandy.
Where'd she go?
I'm here.
Out there, Sandy. Okay, Sandy, you are up for the tip of the day.
Well, the tip of the day is on editing and revising, and sometimes we confuse them, but editing is only, editing a manuscript is only the structure of the writing is being corrected, like spelling, grammar, punctuation, sentence structure. So your overall story remains exactly the same. You're simply fixing mistakes that spell check didn't get, and grammar errors, and one of Jim's favorites, angling or misplaced modifiers. When revising, however, you're changing the meaning of the way in which a reader perceives, experiences, and interprets your manuscript or your book. This is accomplished by adding new thoughts, clarifying existing ideas, choosing more descriptive words, improving. Pardon? Oh, I thought someone said something. Improving overall understanding of ideas presented, enhancing character development, adding more detail, and eliminating unnecessary elements. So when you're revising, you're really revisioning your previous work to make it stronger and improve clarity for your readers. And I looked at a lot of blogs and several books, and unfortunately there is no one single bulletproof way to do it that's just like here's how it is and it will be a perfect revision. However, all of the sources I looked at agreed that the finished manuscript needs to sit and cool off for a minimum of 3 weeks to get your mind away from what that is. They agree on printing out the manuscript because it has a different look than it does when you are reading it on the screen. And they agreed on try to read the entire manuscript in one sitting. And if that's not possible, at least as close together as you possibly can, because it keeps everything fresh in your mind and makes plot problems and character arc issues and so forth easier to spot because it's very fresh. Now, James Scott Bell said in his book that he uses symbols in the margins. He uses a check mark, I have to read this, check mark where story drags in some way, parentheses for sentences or paragraphs that fall flat. He circles material that needs to be added, I'm not quite sure how that works, and a question mark for what was I thinking? Then there are other ways to go about it that suits your style. I happen to like color, so you can go through and highlight whatever your main character is doing in one color, your opposition character or villain, so to speak, in another. I also saw a rather neat graph that looked a lot like one of those charts that it says chapter 1, location, character, what's happening. That seems a little laborious to me because I'm not good with that kind of charting. But you can also use index cards, margin notes, and it's particularly good for when you are reading this a second or third time, to find places where you can do a little foreshadowing that you might not have done because on your first draft through you don't always know what that is. So you can go back and set things up like Chekhov's gun. If you see it in the first act, you're gonna shoot it in the third. And overall, the goal of revision, I think, was summed up by Alfred Hitchcock, who said, "A great story is life with the dull parts taken out." So our goal in that revision is to make it exciting and interesting. That's it.
Very good. Thank you.
All
I have a
right,
question.
Great.
I have an answer.
Okay, good, Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm here. Go ahead.
Okay, Sandy, what was the name of the author that said he uses notes in the margin? Something something.
James Scott Bell. He writes a lot of craft books for Writer's Digest. He's got writing from the middle. He's got beginnings and endings. He's got revise and edit. He's got, anyway, if you just look up James Scott Bell, there are a number of books that that he has on the craft in addition to all the fiction that he writes. He's a very good resource.
Anybody else have a question?
I have a question.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just want to say you sounded perfect, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
It didn't crack.
No cracking.
Okay. But
Yeah,
Lynn's gonna get cracking and ask something.
It's about the mechanics of doing this part of, we're all learning how to do this, and I'm seeing a lot of comments coming in on the chat. Is there some place where we can pause and maybe Jim can address them or the speaker can address them?
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't even see it, chat.
the chat's all about
on
you.
the bottom. It's on the bottom bottom bar, and it's in orange.
Yeah.
I see leave.
And one I failed to mention that I see here came from Mary, in that it helps to read out loud. You will catch a lot of things if you read out loud. You'll hear the cadence of your dialogue. You will find if you have a very long sentence or something that if you stumble at all, that's a pretty good indicator. You want to take another look at that, and that's an area that could use some revision.
Definitely.
There's also a feature that on your computer that will read it to you, and I've caught things that way.
Okay.
By listening.
Well, that's a
Yeah,
good
I'd like to second that about editing. The thing I found about editing for me personally is that it's a personal thing. That and I do a lot of editing. I really spend as much time editing as I do writing, probably more in the long run. I always believe that art in any kind of writing occurs not in the first draft, but in the second or the third or the fourth. Probably not until you get to about the fifth time you're going over your manuscript do you really start creating some kind of art form, if that. I did meet one writer once named Robert Heinlein. Some of you may have heard of him. He wrote Stranger in a Strange Land. He said he never edited.
Crazy.
Which
That's
I always
rare.
found weird. Then I read Stranger in a Strange Land, and I said, yeah, he probably doesn't.
I agree.
At any rate, that was great, Sandy. Thank you.
One more note on
Yeah.
what you were saying with out loud. In the group that I run, which is a spec fic group, we have someone else in the group read the manuscript. And boy, what a rude awakening for the author, because what you think you wrote on the page may not be what other readers read. And it really points out, it illuminates exactly where your intent was not fulfilled. So we find that it's painful. It is so painful to hear someone else read your manuscript and either not put the emphasis where you thought it should be or completely misread a sentence, but that is what your readers are going to be doing. And it's a very informative exercise. Scary, but informative.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't remember if it was McKay or Saul Stein, but they said to have someone else read it, preferably the worst reader possible, because they won't, you will hear more of the issues and problems, because when we as authors read our own, we put we put the emphasis where we expect it to be and so on, and that may not be what the reader gets, so that that's something to consider as well.
Okay, along that line, though, if you take that to its conclusion, it seems to me that there's a false positive there. Take Hemingway's short story, Hills Like White Elephants. He doesn't tell you where to put the emphasis in the last sentence. You have to figure it out. And if somebody doesn't figure it out, that's their fault. And if you had somebody else read that story, and Hemingway said, well, here, you read this, and he didn't get that last sentence and where the emphasis should go, the whole story falls apart.
But that's still really good information for the author, for the writer, to know how an audience is going to read that sentence. So that's my point.
But the point is, he wanted you to figure that out on your own. Hemingway did in that story. Wanted you to figure it out on its own. So
I think we go back to there is not one single silver bullet that works for everybody. But their thoughts, and take what you can if it's useful to you. If not, toss it. Do what you do.
All right. Anything else? Because next I'm going to Michelle. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to Cheryl. Cheryl and Straight Jacket.
Okay, great. So we met yesterday on Zoom and had a blast, just like we do when we're in person. We got through all the submissions, and so look for, I'm going to be sending out this weekend, I'm going to be sending out edited versions of what you've submitted. And so please get back to me, look for those, and get back to me if you agree with the edits. And we will be, what do you guys think, in the next 2 weeks getting the magazine? Ellen?
Oh, say it again, Cheryl.
You think we can manage
Yeah.
in the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, in the next 2 weeks, look for the magazine. I will
Yeah,
send
to get it published. Yeah.
yeah, send out an email to everyone via
Yeah.
the Diamond Valley Writers Guild.
Okay, great. Next, Michelle, you have announcement you'd like to make.
Yeah, real quick though, for those that have joined us that maybe for the first time, could someone tell them what Straight Jackets is?
Cheryl?
Jim?
Or
Well, it's an online magazine. It's an online magazine. This is my interpretation. It's a long magazine that features our members' writings. And I you know, I've looked at other stuff. I'm just so proud of this magazine. I tell it to everybody, including my boss yesterday. He goes, "What do you mean? What?" And so I shot him over the website. But it's so visually gorgeous. Thank you, Ellen, for that transformation. It's just a beautiful thing. But we do our best to, we work long and hard for the writers. We take the story and really go over it. We try to maintain the author's voice, and yet we edit and try to make more clear what they're trying to say, but we work hard. Don't you think, ladies, that we work hard?
Absolutely. But it's a labor of love. We love the editing.
Yes, it is. And then what happens is we're proud to be able to offer to the author a version that we think enhances what they're trying to do. And there's 4 of us working on it. So yesterday I found that I was amazed at what 4 editors looking at something can do to a piece, because we each come to it with a certain perspective. But when one editor says, yeah, but, and we go back and forth, I think we really bring out a great product for the author. That's my take on it.
So one note on the name, because the name threw me off at first, that it's Straight Jackets, but as I understand, that's not a reference to insanity. It's a nod to Raymond Straight.
Yes, it is.
Right, and the magazine address, if for those of you who have not seen it, it's straightjackets.org, but straight is spelled as Rusty's name, straightjackets.org, straightjackets.org. So take a look and you'll see our fall issue, and then in a couple of weeks we'll have the spring issue for you, and we get it out 3 times a year.
All right. Looking forward to it. Michelle, you had another announcement you'd like to make?
Yes, I did. I do run a speculative fiction writers group twice a month on Wednesday evenings, and we do have some available seats. Of course, right now they're virtual seats, not physical seats, but eventually they'll be back to physical seats, I'm sure. So if you're writing in the speculative fiction arena, which is fantasy, science fiction, magical realism, horror, it's a pretty broad, it's about probably 60% of everything that's coming out on television right now. So, you know, if you're writing in that genre and would like to hook up with people of like mind, there are a lot of groups out there that don't specialize, and so there's availability for people who aren't in speculative fiction, but for the group that I've been running for many years, that's what we concentrate on. If you're interested, message me separately. I'll put in the chat my email. You can also go to my website and click on Twitter or Facebook and connect with me there, but I'll put that in the chat. And if you don't know how to do the chat, my phone number was in one of the things sent out this week on the dry run for this event, and you can text me on my phone number as well. Okay, that's it.
All right. And at this spot, I think it's time for Karen.
Yay!
Yay, Karen!
Karen is going to talk about, I'm not going to steal his thunder here, but about something that is at least close to my heart in terms of writing. She's going to talk about magazine writing. That's where I got my start. And I sold my first published works to magazines. and I built up a resume of magazine articles that got me my first book contract. So to me, magazine articles are a great way to get credits. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Karen. Karen, it's up to you now. It's all yours.
Okay, I guess I don't have to wear this today, huh? But I had to show you that I had one anyway, and I have to show you this. This is made out of an old sock.
Is it
Laundered, I hope.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not even going to comment on that.
That's wise.
Well, first of all, by show of hands, how many of you, is this your very first experience with Zoom? No? Everybody's done it before?
Oh, so hi, Jeannie. Jeannie raised her hand.
Only one. Everybody's been doing it. Isn't that awesome? Okay, well, we had a wonderful Easter get together. We had about 25 people on Zoom, and we played bingo, and it was a blast. And then we had an Easter egg hunt, and I took my computer around, and people would call out, oh, I see a yellow one by the fireplace, and I see a green one by the sofa. And for my husband's birthday party, we had 31 people for a surprise birthday party.
Aww.
And it was great. Now, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. I'm like Jim. I got my street creds from writing for magazines. And I want to make one disclaimer, and that is I have not been writing for digital magazines. I'm talking about magazines that you can hold in your hand. That's the kind of magazines that we're going to talk about today. And you can, if you wave your hand, if you happen to be on my screen, I can see you, but there's about 25 people that aren't on my screen. So I won't be able to see them. I don't know how, I guess Jim could let me know.
I can't see everybody either, so.
Yeah. But anyway, we'll have questions at the end. How many of you that I can see have already written for magazines, several magazines? Mm-hmm. Ooh, not very many. Okay, there's a few. Okay. In 1984, a guy named Gordon Burgett wrote a book and taught a class at Cal State San Bernardino, a one-night class. And it was called How to Sell 75% of Your Freelance Work. And I went and took the class, and I did what he told us to do, and I started selling magazine articles. And the reason I called this class Don't Snicker or Dicker, it's quicker and slicker, is because when I think of my writing, my first book that I wrote on raising kids took me 6 years. The first novel I wrote took me about 30 years from the time I thought of the idea until I finally wrote it, until I finally got it published. But an article you can write in an hour and have it in the mail. 2 hours, maybe max. So, and the first book that I wrote, I got a $500 advance and 49 cents per book that was sold. And yet you can write an article and get paid maybe nothing because it's a magazine that doesn't pay anything, or maybe hundreds of dollars. The point is you haven't spent 30 years writing the darn thing. And you know whether they're going to take it or they aren't going to take it. The second book that I wrote, there was a girl, I wanted to tell you about this because it's one of my favorite stories. There was a girl who said, anything you know, you should write a book about it. And so I was going to a writer's conference And in 3 days, I heard Kinko's was having a sale. In 3 days, I wrote a book called Do the Right Thing. It's just a little manual on how to write for magazines, how to sell to magazines. And I sold, they cost me $1.29 to print, and I sold them for $10 a piece like pancakes. So, you know, I just, the novel writing is fun, but my goodness, you have slaved for so long. So, until of course you get into NaNoWriMo, and then it happens pretty fast. Okay, so where do you get your ideas? You know, writing a magazine article can happen by accident. I was writing a letter to my mother one day, and I had just been to a place that had mulberry trees. And as I kicked through the leaves of the mulberry tree, I was reminded of my dad's mulberry tree and how the boys used to come over and swing from its limbs and show off how strong they were. And they would tease my dad that they were going to carve their names in his treasured tree, and how my dad always wished that all the leaves would come down in one day, so he would send my sister and I up into the limbs to shake all the branches and try to get them all to come down in one day. So I'm writing this story to my mom, just memories about this tree and how much it meant to me. When I got finished, I just cut that out, sent it to a magazine, and sold it. So I think sometimes magazine articles just happen by accident. They're so easy to do. You can get ideas from anything or anybody, and how-tos are the easiest. So if you know how to do something, it doesn't make any difference what it is. A how-to article is easy to sell. The trick is to sell it in the right place. Most people who have started out writing for magazines made the biggest mistake of all. The biggest mistake of all is to write an article and send it to a magazine. You will get a rejection. And then people think, well, I'm a lousy writer. I'm not going to write for magazines. It's not any fun. But I'll tell you what the trick is. Personal profiles. Magazines love personal profiles. So if you know somebody that's important, you can write a story about them. Fillers, if you're funny and you like to write funny stuff, they love fillers because they never know how much space they're going to have to fill up. I had a friend who had 9 kids, and when she went to the hospital, she left a to-do list for her husband to take care of the other 8 kids. It was on a little skinny piece of paper. She tacked it on the wall. It went all the way down the wall and across the room, all the instructions of the things he needed to do for those 8 kids while she was in the hospital. He took it off, sent it to a magazine, and they published it and paid.
Oh my goodness.
So that's why I'm saying you can write an article by accident, just about something that's happened to you, some tiny little snippet of life. And aren't those the favorite ones that you like to read? They are to me anyway. For a while, I wrote for an alumni magazine. And you may be saying, well, let's see, you know, don't all of your colleges send out alumni magazines? Well, I graduated from Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, but I wrote for the University of Arizona alumni magazine, which I loved because all they would just tell me, here are the people you're going to write about. And I got to call and interview them. I got to do Bob Baffert, who is, his horses have won the Triple Crown twice and 15 times on the various races. I got to talk to a Broadway star, a romance author, all kinds of interesting people. And all I had to write was just a tiny little box by their picture. It was probably the hardest writing I ever did because you were limited to about 100 words. So you know how they say it's harder to write small than it is to write long. Where do I find my magazines? Okay, there are 4 places that I would recommend that you find the magazines to write for. One of them, of course, is Writer's Market. And this comes out annually, and it has book publishers as well as magazines. It's a huge book. And the first time I ever bought one of these, I think I stayed up all night. I got so excited about all the opportunities they are. And this is not exhaustive. There are a lot more magazines than what are listed in this book. Another place, I happen to be a Christian, and so I look at the Christian Writers Market Guide, and it comes out every year or two. And the third place would be to go into Barnes and Noble and just look through the racks and see what's there that you're interested in, or that you would have something that they would want. You know, but don't write. I keep saying, don't write yet. You're just shopping. I call it prospecting, but I've had friends who called me a writing prostitute because I'm looking for the magazine who wants what I have, okay? Or I want to have what they're asking for. So I'm not doing a literary work. I'm not, when you're doing a book, that's different. I just want to fill their need of what it is that they're looking for. And oftentimes people write an article that they love, but then they send it to the wrong magazine. They send it to a magazine that won't take it. So I take the Writer's Market, and the first thing I do is I start looking for magazines that pay on acceptance, unless you just want to write for free. And if you want to build street creds, you can do that by just writing for magazines that don't pay anything, because they're more likely to take your stuff. They don't have to pay for it. So when I first started, I wrote for magazines that didn't necessarily pay anything. One of the first articles I wrote was how to start quitting, and I had just quit smoking. And so I wrote an article about quitting smoking and sent it to this little tiny magazine in Canada, which, mind you, made me an international writer right off the bat. So, and they took it. So on acceptance, you don't really want to write for a magazine that says they pay on publication. I wrote an article about my husband for a Midwestern magazine. Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you how many years ago. And they paid on publication. Well, they can hold that article for years and years and years, and you can't do anything with it because they're still holding it. And I've written back to them a couple of times, and they always say, oh, no, that's still in our files. So publication is not your best bet. The second thing I look at is I look to see if they welcome freelancers. Because if you see that it's 5% freelance written, that means their staff is writing most of the articles. Don't go there. You don't, you know, you're competing against their staff. Then there's just a whole, well, I'll turn to one, for example. Okay, I'll go to the very first one called AKC Gazette. It's an animal magazine. And I've always wanted to publish this article about a dog that we had that, well, I'll show you his friend. Here's his friend. Can you see it? And that's his dish. That's the dog's dish. And here is the two of them eating out of it together. Oh. Can you see it?
Yeah.
It's a shot from behind, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
At least we didn't notice.
We didn't notice, yeah. Anyway, So I look at that magazine and it says 85% freelance written. Hey, that's a good sign. That means I've got a good chance. It says it's a monthly magazine and it's about purebred dogs. Well, our dog was half-bred, not purebred. It says we are not a pet magazine. Okay, that gives me a clue. It was established in 1889. Well, it's been around for a long time and the circulation is 60,000. And a byline is given. That means they'll put my name on the article. There's nothing more annoying than writing an article and you don't get your name on it. But it pays on publication. So I probably wouldn't be excited about that. And it offers a 10% kill fee, which means if they don't publish your work, and they hold it, they'll pay you a 10% kill fee. Publishes an average of 6 months after acceptance. And they take seasonal, let's see, and I circled, they accept queries by mail. You have to, well, we'll get to queries. We'll talk about that. That's the most important part. But here's what they want: general interest, how-to, humor, interviews, photo features. Now see, if you have photos, if you tell them you have photos of something, that's a big plus when you're selling an article. I've had several articles published just because I had photos. So I tell people, take pictures of everything. You never know when you're going to want to use it. It says no poetry. So if they say no poetry, don't even try. You hear me, Howard? It says tributes to individual dogs or fiction, canine performance, and then it wants 1,000 to 3,000 words, and it pays $300 to $500. Are you getting that? Sitting writing a book?
Nope.
Okay. And for the photo, and I've also written articles where I got paid more for the photos than I got paid for the article. Depends on what kind of a magazine it is and what the quality of your photos are. But it has a whole lot of information. So by the time you read everything in there, you should have a pretty good idea of what they'll take and what they won't take. All submissions are welcome, but author must be a credible expert or be able to interview and quote the experts. Okay, so I'm not an expert and my dog wasn't purebred, but it says humorous features or personal experiences relative to purebred dogs should have broader application. So who knows? You know, that might be worth a try, but since it's published on publication, I don't know if I would try that one or not. Oops. So I'm just going to go through a couple of things that I found while I was on there. When I'm looking, like, let's say I was looking in the animal category. We'll just stick with animals for right now. Everybody's got a dog or a cat or a something. I might find 3 of them that I liked, but I'm going to try for the one that pays the most money first. And I'm going to try for the one that pays on acceptance first. And then I'll tell you what to do with the list. But I try to have a list. So let's say I'm going to try that one. I'll make a file that says AKC or animal. And then I'll write the date of when I started my quest. I'll tell you about that. Okay, so I'll list 3 of them that look like they might take something about animals. Now, some, again, I said some of them don't pay you anything, and some of them will pay $1 a word, $2 a word, $5 a word, depends. So I just looked through this book as I was preparing my lesson, and here are some things that stirred me up. Okay, there's a magazine called Miniature Donkey. All right, I have 2 donkeys that live right next door to me, good old Darla and Maribel. and Maribel is pregnant. So I'm thinking when Maribel has that little baby, guess who's going to be over there taking pictures?
You bet.
And there's your story. There's an article. There's another one, Jeannie, you'll like this one, called Mushing Magazine. And my friend Jeannie, who's on here someplace, I can't see her now, but she's on the next page somewhere. Her brother-in-law runs the Iditarod and has many times. He would be perfect for me to interview and do an article, a profile article on him. Win or lose, how many people do articles on guys that do the Iditarod or even know them? Young writer, okay? We have a young writer in our neighborhood. She's about 15. I could go do something on her. I think it's pretty funny because she walks her horse around the block. I keep telling her she's supposed to be on top of it. There's one of the magazines was named Art Link, and it pays $300. And I know lots of artists who do some really phenomenal art. In fact, I have some of it hanging in my home that I could do articles on, do a profile article on. However, when I read the parameters, they deal with Australian artists. So I'm out, can't do that one. There was an architectural magazine. Now see, I don't know anything about any of these things. Architecture, now my father-in-law actually designed the steelwork on top of the Empire State Building that was added later on. My father-in-law. So I could do an article on him for an architecture magazine. Southwest Art is a coffee table magazine. And I happen to know an Indian artist named Robert Freeman. And I decided to do an article on him. And he said, you'll never get it published in that magazine. It's too high class and other people have tried. So when I tell you about query letters, you'll see what I mean. When I queried them, they wrote back and said, can you do a sidebar on how he does his etchings? And of course I said, sure. And I did a sidebar on how to do an etching. And I discovered that I think the reason that I could sell so easily to magazines is because I write 4th and 5th grade. Because I taught 4th and 5th grade for years and years and years. And that's what most people who read magazines want to read. They don't want to read a literary work. They want to read something that's quick and easy. So you don't want to try to impress them with big words. Let's see. By the way, that Southwest Art was the highest paid I ever got. And I got paid for every photograph. I took pictures of him doing etchings and so forth. Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Let me think, what could I do for them? Well, they pay on acceptance and they pay 30 cents a word. And my husband and my son-in-law have a trick way to load a 500-pound elk into the back of a pickup, just with the two of them. Now, I wish I had pictures of it, and I don't. But I don't think there's many hunters that know how to do that, because when they went to celebrate the elk that they got, they went to the nearest local bar in Montana where all the drinkers said, there's no way you loaded that thing in the pickup truck. And Barry said he thought it was about 700 pounds, but I cut it down to 5 because you know how hunters are. And they could not believe it. And they went out and they taught them how to do it. Western Horseman. I'm married to a cowboy, so I have written and written and written for Western Horseman. But I've written about team pinning and team sorting and rodeos and all kinds of cowboy things. I've written for fire magazines. My husband was also a firefighter, from cowboy to fireman. What a great article. But anyway, one day my husband was on a roundup and there was a cow that, you know what a cattle guard is? A cattle guard,
yeah.
it's that thing that goes across the road and cows aren't supposed to try to walk across it. Well, old Bossy had tried to walk across it and she was in there all 4 legs down.
No.
So these cowboys figured out a way how to get that cow out of there without breaking her legs, which is another thing that usually happens. And they got her out, but somebody was there taking pictures of the whole thing. So he brought the pictures home. I sent the pictures to Western Horseman. Boom, I've got an article. How to get Bossy out of the cattle guard. I'm telling you, it's so much fun to write for magazines. Okay, there was another one called American Iron. It's about Harley Davidsons. Okay, Harley Davidson. Well, I used to have a motorcycle, by golly. What could I write for Harley Davidson? Well, I had a friend who took an early retirement at 50 and signed up for the Harley Davidson Mechanic School in Arizona. So I thought, oh, I could write an article about him. How interesting. Here he was, a mathematician, and he decided to go be a Harley mechanic. So I called the I didn't call the magazine, I queried them. The guy wrote back and he said, no, not interested, but would you be interested in writing an article about Harley mechanics and what makes them different? Why, heck yeah. What do I know about Harley mechanics, you know? And for the next 4 Saturdays, I sat on the phone and I talked to Harley mechanics all the way from Florida to California and interviewed them. It was the most darn fun. There is a female Harley mechanic in San Bernardino, maybe not still, but then, who weighed 110 pounds and didn't have a single tattoo. I'm just saying. And it's so much fun. Well, then I got the idea, well, I think I'll go over to Arizona to that school and take some pictures at the mechanic school. So I called the editor and I said, would you, because they will pay your way if they want you to do an off-site thing. I said, would you pay my way over to Arizona so I can do an article on that school? And he says, Karen, for crying out loud, we're only paying you $100. No. So I wrote the article, I sent it to him, and guess what? They paid me $200. So evidently they liked what I wrote. Quilting. I don't quilt, nor do I want to, but I know people who do. And when I was in the 5th grade, our 5th grade teacher had us quilt squares, and then she put them together and made a lap quilt for herself. So when I taught 5th grade, I had all the kids made squares and threw them in a box to be forgotten. And about 10 years later, I donated that box to a church, forgetting that all those squares the kids had made were in the bottom of the box. And one day on my classroom door, here came a knock, and this lady in an electric wheelchair had come 2 miles underneath the freeway and around to where my school was to bring me the quilt that they had finished when they found the squares in the box.
Oh.
Wrote a story about it, sold it. Okay, kit planes. What do I know about kit planes? Well, another one of my brother-in-laws built a kit plane, and his first flight out, he landed it in a cow pasture, and he was more afraid of the cows than he was of his crash landing. And I thought, what a great story. I could write that. I wrote a lot of things for computer magazines about kids and when I was teaching computers to kids. Okay, going on. Arthritis. Heck, we could all write about arthritis, couldn't we, for Arthritis magazine? I'm now doing something called myofascia release therapy. I bet you a lot. How many of you have heard of myofascia release therapy? See there? I could write about that. There's a cartoon magazine. I know 2 or 3 very famous cartoonists that I could write profiles on. Am I boring you yet?
No.
Fascinating.
I'm just telling you how fun it is to shop through there and think, what do I know about this? Or who do I know about this? Chicken Soup for the Soul actually pays $200. And all of you have those inspirational stories of things that happen in your life that you can write. And those are great because you know they're gonna, they may not take your story, but you know the book's gonna get published. Let's see. I found one called 5 Points that takes essays, and they pay $15 a page. I saw one called Makeup Artists, and when I played Cher with Sonny and Cher a couple of years ago and did a show in Temecula, a makeup artist came because you probably could guess a little bit of change needed to be made here to make me look like Cher. And so I could write about her, but think about this. If I write about her, who's the big winner? I get the article, I get my name in a magazine, but suddenly everybody knows about her. So you see, sometimes it's a two-way win when you do this. Let's see, I just thought of one. Well, it's just like that Robert Freeman one for Southwest Art. Don't you know what that did for his popularity to be published in a magazine like that? So sometimes you're doing it to, I just read Kathy Macias' book. She spoke at our guild a couple of months ago that I really, really, really liked. And I saw, and I know she's a Christian, and I saw in the Christian writers book, Market Guide, that there are a lot of places where you can write writer reviews. And I thought, ooh, what a great place to put something nice about another writer that you really enjoyed. And a lot of your magazines will take reviews about things that apply to their topic, to their subject matter. Now, I see Mary's on here, Mary Putnam, and I was thinking about, wouldn't it be fun, Mary, for me to write a story about Dave and how Dave got published? And I know Dave told the story the day he came, her husband, but when I met him on the treadmill, I think at the gym or at Toastmasters, one or the other, he had written about 26 or 8 books and never had one published. And that just impressed me all over the place. So I was, gosh, all of a sudden I lost a word. I was not
snorkeling in Bora Bora.
I was not scuba diving. What was I doing, Mary?
Snorkeling. You were snorkeling.
I was snorkeling in Bora Bora, okay? And as we got back on the boat, my husband and I sat down with this couple, and she said she was a writer. Well, immediately I was attracted to her, and she said, yeah, and my husband is my publisher. Well, that's great. And then I said, hey, I know this guy that's written 25 or 26 books and he's never been published. You know, what advice would you have for him? I think he's tried agents and everything. And he said, have him send me your book, his book, and write a little note that we met snorkeling in Bora Bora. And so I did. And Mary, how many of his books have they published now?
We're working on number 8 right now that comes out in 2021. Thank you, Karen. You're awesome.
There you go. So you never know what's going to lead you down the, but you know what? Part of it is meeting people.
And we all need to go snorkeling in Bora Bora.
Yeah, baby.
We have to do that too. Yeah, that's a small thing. Yeah. But let's see, what else? American journalism takes exposés. See, they pay a lot. They pay $1,500 to $2,000, but that's expose magazine. I don't know anybody I want to expose right now. So, and if I did, it probably wouldn't be important enough for anybody to care, right? My next, maybe, I don't know. Ski patrol. Let's see. I skied twice, poorly, but my brother-in-law, who built the kid plane, used to be on the ski patrol. Now, see, that's not very interesting. The interesting part about him was, though, one day he skied down the hill to help a lady, skied into her and broke her leg, which I thought was hilarious. So I could do a humor, and they take humor. So, you know, I could do something like that. There was in Temecula, there used to be a bar called hey, am I going over time, Jim?
Well, you got a few more minutes there.
Oh,
It's 10:30.
What time do you want me to quit?
Well, we go from what, 9:30 to 11. I need a couple of minutes at the end.
Okay.
You're getting a question on query letters.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about.
I want to get there. Yeah, reunions. You know, everybody has family reunions. Unfortunately, that magazine just closed down, but I think I wrote 8 articles for them, various things about family reunions. I think the one magazine I want to mention before I go into the query letters is I always wanted to be a missionary, and my husband said, "Knock yourself out, just don't leave the block." So I made little loaves of bread, and I took them around we lived in the country, so it was a long block. And I went to each house, gave them a little loaf of bread and said, "Hi, I'm Karen. I'm a Christian. Can I pray for you?" And every single person invited me in, and I got to hear their whole life stories. Everybody has a wonderful story. And so when I was telling somebody about it one time, maybe 10 years later, and they said, "You ought to write an article about that." I said, "Oh yeah, I should." So I did. I wrote an article to a magazine that has 3 million circulation. And that's Billy Graham's magazine, Decision. And they published it. And the day it came out, I got emails from India, one of the African countries that I can't say the name right now. And as the sun came up and people read the article all across the United States, people contacted me. And I got to be a missionary around the world.
Oh.
Now stop and think about it. When you think about how many people read your book, and yet here was a magazine article that went around the world. And that's the actually second article that I've had that's gone around the world and people have contacted me. So here's the trick. Most people write an article, send it, get rejected. That's just the way it goes. Because when you send an article without a query letter, it's like throwing your book manuscript into the transom of a publisher. He doesn't know who you are. He doesn't know anything about you, and it's not going to go anyplace. But the query letter is magic, and I call it the hook, line, and sinker. The hook is the first sentence has got to grab that editor. Oh, by the way, I usually don't write to the very first editor either. I choose one of the assisting editors if I can find their name, because I figure they want to come forward with a great idea and they'll have something to offer at the editorial meeting. So I usually don't choose the top editor, I choose an assisting editor. Okay, so the hook. For example, I wrote for American Quarter Horse, and my opening line in the hook was, "Who shot Doc Barr?" Well, Doc Barr is a real famous quarter horse, and I'm sure the editor of Quarter Horse Journal went, "What? Somebody shot Doc Barr?" But actually, it was a friend of mine who is he's an equestrian photographer, and he shot a very famous picture of Doc Barr. And my article was about him and how he took the picture of Doc Barr. So you see what I mean about a hook? You want something magical, something that's going to say, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Then the line, well, see, I gave you, I did, didn't I? I gave you an example.
Yep.
Yeah, a really silly example. I was just fooling around, but anyway, reading Animal Life inspired me to write an 800-word humorous filler about strange animal behavior I've observed. That's not much of a hook. The quarter horse hook was a much better one. Okay, the line is, what makes you qualified to write this article? Do you know the person, or have you had experience in that area, or just and you want it really short. You want it really short. What qualifies you to write that article? And whatever you do, don't say this is the first thing I've ever written. You know. Then the sinker is when you tell them where you've been published. And if you have never been published before, don't lie. Just leave that paragraph out. If you've been published in your church bulletin, don't bother mentioning that. But if you have anything that has given you a few credits, mention that. Sorry about the phone ringing in the background. But it's your street creds. And Gordon Burgett said, if you have, let's say you have 3 things that you've been published in, he'll say, mention 2 of them and say, and others. If you've now see, I'll say dozens because I have been published in dozens of magazines. So I'll name the ones that will be most impressive to the publisher, to the editor, and then I'll say, and dozens more. Sometimes they'll ask for clips, so it's really important that you keep a record of anything that you do get published, so in case they ask for clips, you'll have them to send. And be sure and mention if you have photos. I think photos are a big winner in most magazines. And sometimes you get paid for them, and sometimes, like I said, you get paid more for them. You probably won't have any pictures of cowboys getting a cow out of a cattle guard, but hey, no. So now all you've done, all you've invested in this is shopping in your writer's market. You've shopped, you found where you're going to send. Then you're going to query. That's your next step. And it will tell you how to query in here. It'll either say they want them by, with a stamp envelope, return envelope, or it'll say electronic queries are fine. Of course, I prefer electronic, but I kind of like the old-fashioned way too, because then you know when you get it back what you're getting back. And they have, there's 3 answers that they can give, actually 4. The first one is, yes, we'll take it. And if they say, yes, we like your idea, you have 3 weeks to write it and get the manuscript to them. Or they say, no, we don't like it. We're not accepting material of that kind at this time. But I want to tell you what to do with that guy. Okay, then they may say, yes, we'll take it, but we want something different, or we want you to add a sidebar, or they'll make suggestions. Or you may just get a contract in the mail, which is a yes, of course. And all they want you to do is sign it and send it back. But for the one that says no, this is most important. Do not let that sit on your desk. I always say it is not a rejection as long as you can get that query letter back in the mail to the next person on your list. Don't let it sit there and mold and make you feel bad because it's the name of the game. You're gonna get rejections, but you're also going to get acceptances because you're all good writers already. And you can mention that you've written books. You don't have to have been published in a magazine. Okay, let's see what else. Oh, and I tried, when I was doing it actively, I tried to keep 10 query letters at a time going. And then that way, it's sort of like a game. You'd get something back in the mail all the time, and it would keep you energized and excited about continuing. And keep a file so you know who you queried, when you queried, so you can keep track of that. And don't just think that there was a guy from Murrieta who was a professional whistler, and he was on Johnny Carson's show one night. And I thought, oh, he's from Murrieta. I could go meet him. I could have him whistle to me. Then I start looking for magazines. 1, he was Black. 2, he was in the Navy. 3, he was a musician. 4, he was from Pennsylvania. 5, he was from Murrieta. 6, he had been on the Johnny Carson show. I'm thinking, so I make myself a little wheel with all these different areas that I could query, and you'll never guess which one took it. The Pennsylvania magazine. About I guess they were proud of them, so that was good. They took it. I think I've just about covered everything. Let's see, and I also gave you a copy of what the heading of a manuscript should look like. You probably knew that already, but that's the example that has the word count and everything up there. And of course, you still have to edit. You don't want to send any junk in, and you don't want to send in anything that's not in the style that you're used to writing. There was one other thing I was going to tell you about is this. I don't know if you know of Haro, H-A-R-O, at helpareporter.com. And if you get on that twice a day, they send you a whole list of subjects that reporters are looking for quotes or information on, and it's kind of fun. I think that's how I got invited to be on the Steve Harvey show. All kinds of things, interesting things come on there. And it'll come out twice a day. Half the time I ignore it, but sometimes I'll look through it, and if I know something about one of the topics, I'll send them a quote. And it's reporters who are writing stories for magazines and newspapers, and they're just looking for material. So, questions?
Okay, do we have any questions? I cannot see everybody.
Look at the arrow.
I have a question.
Okay, got a question?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Howard.
Yes. Once they accept the material, is it then their material from then on?
Ooh, good question. That's a great question. It will tell you in the writer's market whether they buy first rights, all rights. First rights mean they're buying the rights just to print it once. All rights means they have it, they own it, they can do anything they want with it. And you can negotiate those things. But that's, it will tell you which rights they offer. That's a good question.
Do you ask more money if they want to keep it permanently?
I've never had that happen. I've never had anybody really want to keep anything permanently.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you made me think of something else, but I can't remember it. Okay, I lost it. Oh, well, you know, on your books that get out of print, you can get your rights back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Anybody else have another question? No? Okay. Well, I got a question from Dan.
Yeah, I'm just curious, Karen, if you ever wrote an article about that play we did.
No, I haven't yet, but wouldn't that be an interesting experience? How do three gals that know absolutely nothing about playwriting write a play and perform it in less than what, 3 months, 3 or 4 months?
Okay. Yeah, I have one little sideline on it. One article I once had written, I'd been writing for True West, and they called me up. Some of you have already heard this story. It's one I tell a lot. But they called me up. This was 1980, and Reagan had just been elected president. And they called me up. They said, Jim, we want you to write a article on the Western films of Ronald Reagan. Will you do that? I said, of course. So I wrote the article, non-political. I never said anything in favor or against Ronald Reagan and his politics, not a thing. It was all about the fact he loved doing Westerns, and I talked about the Westerns he made and so forth. So it was the
That
lead
must have been
article.
before you married Vicky.
Yeah, it was a lead article. It was on the page, front page, you know, picture of Ronald Reagan, my story on the front page, the whole thing, the lead article. A month later, after it appeared, I got a phone call, and the editor said, Jim, I got some good news for you and some bad news. I said, oh, really? He said, the good news, we had more response to your article than any article we've ever run. I said, that's terrific. We also had more cancellation of subscriptions.
Oh.
So after that, after that, they stopped. This was a True West magazine, and they didn't want a story that was not a True West story. And so after that, they dropped any references to movies. So that was really the reason why.
Well, you know, though, you're right. I do think that writing articles for as long as I did gave me street creds when it came time to publish my book, because the first book I published with a traditional publisher, and I'm not sure that would have happened if they didn't know that I had written for a bunch of magazines.
Yeah,
also, I was going to say, you know, sometimes we have not because we asked not. And when my son was 12, he's 54 now, he played Pop Warner football, and talk about boring. I mean, they lost by 32 points every single Saturday. And so I would write like a Irma Bombeck hilarious story about the football game every Saturday and send it to the newspaper. And of course, you know, Murrieta was little then, and so they published my column about Pop Warner football and how they lost by 32 points every week. And one week I would sit with the coaches, and one week I'd sit with the players, and one week I'd go drag the chain up and down, and one week I'd talk to the refs. And so I had great fun doing it. And every week I'd turn in my column. So one week I missed the deadline and they didn't print me. And the editor said it was the first time he had ever gotten a letter. I still have it, from a guy in Sun City who said he was sorry, but his week just couldn't go on without reading my Pop Warner column. And so I was telling this story to a friend, and she says, well, how much did you get paid? And I said, get paid? Was I supposed to get paid for doing that? I was just having fun. And she said, oh yeah, you're supposed to get paid. I said, well, okay. So I sent them a bill and they paid me for all those columns.
Great, great. Karen, I have a question.
Yes.
And it's triggered by your handout, collecting the money, and having just come through tax season. I'm wondering, have you set yourself up as a separate business for tax purposes as a writer?
Yes, I always have, because I've always had some kind of little side thing going. And I've put my all my speaking and writing and every kind of bundled it into one. Yes.
Do you have any tips on how we do that? You know, deductions? What do you write off parts of your house? Just curiosity.
Yes. Oh yeah. That's a great question. I wrote off a percentage. You write off a percentage of your house for your office, your travel, like when you drive to meetings or you pay for a conference, a writer's conference, or you drive to a writer's conference, you buy office supplies. I write off all that. And now this last year is the first year I don't think I made any money. And lately, in the last couple of years, every cent that has come in to me, I donate to Rady Children's Hospital that saved my grandson from brain cancer. So it's kind of a wash, you know. So I didn't have any real money that I could claim last year. And my CPA said, really be nice if you would sell that novel that you just finished to a traditional publisher. Because the first novel I wrote, I sold to a print on demand. So it cost me to pay to have it printed.
Great.
And it was all write-off, but I'm not very good at keeping track of sales, and I usually end up giving away more books than I sell. Now, see, Mary Putnam, she would be a good one to talk to about that, because they're out there doing book signings and really trying to crank up the book sales. I'm terrible at that.
Thank you.
I use them for house guest presents.
Excuse me, I'm going to go now, but thank you very much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, go on.
Hi.
Karen, you did a great job. I'd like to give everybody a applause there.
Thank
Terrific.
you.
Awesome.
I need to see. Michelle, are you around still?
I am. I'm right here.
Okay, Michelle, you want to talk about our speaker for next time?
Yeah, absolutely. So next meeting is in May, and whether it's virtual or it is live will depend, of course, on the state of the world. But either way, Jonathan Maybury, who is a New York Times bestselling author, he recently had a Netflix show, V-Wars, which was based on a graphic novel series of his produced this last year. He's got a couple other things. He does a lot. Anyway, he's going to be speaking next month on short story writing. So actually, I was Facebook messaging him last night and just kind of making sure he realized we were still here despite us not meeting at the library next month. And so we're still on his schedule as of last night.
Excellent.
But when you think about it, isn't this pretty cool? You didn't have to drive anywhere. You didn't have to get all your stuff together. I mean, I threw a party for 31 people and I didn't even have to clean my house or make food.
Karen, you did great.
Yes, you did a great job. But we can't go to Emilio's afterwards. So
That's a bummer.
That's a bummer.
I have a burrito. I have a burrito in the refrigerator, though I could make it in front of you.
No, it's been great. I hope everybody's enjoyed it as much as I have, and we will see you in a month. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.